Week 17 of the fantasy football season. Championship coming up in fantasy leagues. Here's a few defense DST units that help owners this week. The first defense, the Los Angeles Chargers, out there, 56% of fantasy leagues. And this week, a great matchup for this Charger team at the New England Patriots. I give up the 6 most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So I know it wasn't a good last few weeks here for this Charger defense. Week 14 at the Chiefs, 19 points allowed, 3 sacks. 15 versus Tampa, 40 points allowed, sack, interception, fumble recovery. In week 16 versus Denver, 27 points allowed, 2 sacks in that one. So week 17, like I said, good streaming option at New England. 6 most points to DSTs on the season, even though I know they gave the Buffalo Bills a good fight in that ball game. But Los Angeles, we've seen versus bad teams this season. They go out there and they put up some good performances. So this week, the New England Patriots, I think they could go out there and have a serviceable game. Next DSTs, the Indianapolis Colts, another streaming option this week. I know last week their defense got off to a good start in that ball game versus the Tennessee Titans, and then it fell apart in garbage time where they didn't put up many points. Is this Indianapolis defense? Week 13 in New England, 24 points allowed, 4 sacks, INT. Week 15 at Denver, 25 points allowed, a sack, 3 interceptions. In week 16 versus Tennessee, 30 points allowed, a sack, 3 interceptions. So their defense definitely creates turnovers, but they give up a decent amount of points as well. And this week, another good streaming option at the Giants that give up the 4th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. And at this point, I think the New York Giants, they're obviously tanking. They need a quarterback in the worst way. Shador Sanders or obviously Cam Ward. And this week, I think Indianapolis could go into New York, have a middle of the pack outing, and this week they're available in 53% of fantasy leagues. Next DSTs, the Miami Dolphins. I thought the Dolphins played a decent ball game versus San Francisco 49ers, winning 29-17 in that one. So the last few weeks for this defense, not eye-popping numbers. Week 14 versus Jets, 26 points allowed, 3 sacks. Week 15 at Houston, 20 points allowed, 4 sacks, a fumble recovery. In week 16 versus San Francisco, 17 points allowed, 3 sacks, and an INT. So week 17, a great matchup at the Cleveland Browns. They give up the 2nd most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So now with Thompson, Robinson in their quarterback, we saw Cleveland had trouble all game long last week in that matchup at the Cincinnati Bengals, where the Bengals held them to 6 points in that game. And I know they fumbled one at the 1-yard line, was Deonta Foreman in the first drive of the game. And ever since that game just turned around and it was over. But I think Miami, their defense could go into Cleveland. They could play a good ball game. And also this Miami team is still alive in the playoff hunt right now. So this week, I think they're DST that could go out there and be a decent streaming option, available right now in 54% of fantasy leagues. Next DSTs, the New Orleans Saints. The Saints, another streaming option. I know they didn't play yet, obviously, but week 17, a good matchup versus the Vegas Raiders that give up the 3rd most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So obviously, besides Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers, there's nothing really going on in that offense for the Vegas Raiders, and they're not putting a lot of points on the board. So like I said, Aiden O'Connell, he hasn't been a total bad quarterback at the position, but he's not a quarterback. Go out there and light up the scoreboard. So I think this week, this New Orleans Saints DST could go out there, they could have a decent ball game as a streaming option, even with all the injuries, and they're available in 60% of fantasy leagues. And the final DST I have as an ad is the Tennessee Titans. So this Titan defense obviously got the doors blown off in last week's ball game at the Indianapolis Colts, giving up 38 points, a sack, and an interception. But another 1-week streaming option, another division game coming up here, week 17 at Jacksonville, that gives up 14th most fantasy points to the DSTs on the season. To Tennessee, they've created turnovers at times, but for the most part, they have given up a lot of lopsided scores. But with a depleted offense in Jacksonville, obviously Trevor Lawrence out for the season, Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, Gabe Davis all out for the season, and Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby not really doing much out of the backfield. I believe Tennessee could go out there, have a bounce-back outing, even though we know they're really tanking right now. They haven't won a ball game since week 12. And this week here at Jacksonville could be an offensive struggle for both teams, like we saw with Jacksonville and the Raiders in week 16. It's a few defense DST units I looked at off the wire week 17 of the fantasy football season.